Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Doppler'S Gear Garage number 34. Glad you could be here. Rigs and routing. Holy cow. So, behind me, you'll see an array of different amps and various modeling devices, and there is an ever-growing collection of gear that I'm in the midst of doing some sort of demo or inclusion in demos, and one of the things that I am having a lot of hands-on experience is wiring and setting up different types of rigs. And most guitar players traditionally work off of one main rig, that they're just kind of, that's the rig. And kind of the midst of this kind of interesting season is I've got lots of different rigs that I'm setting up. Right now, I'm in the middle of wrapping the first demo for something for Celestion that's going to appear on my channel for a plugin called Speaker Mix Pro. Speaker Mix Pro. And it is basically an IR plugin for guitars and bass, but it actually uses their DSRs and basically their dynamic speaker responses, and they are exceedingly cool. And in the process, I'm kind of lying in bed, this morning after working until like 2:30 in the morning, at about 7 o'clock, I'm lying. Now, what rigs can I configure and how? So then I can kind of take a tap and pull that and bring that into the box. And as I was kind of deconstructing that, I was like, this is an interesting thing, because I'm kind of like have this kind of Rubik's Cube vibe going on with all these different pieces of gear. And so I thought that'd be a really timely thing to talk about, because there are so many different ways that we can route some of this stuff. And there's so many different pieces to the equation that I'm spending enough time kind of, flipping the cube around, that I'm getting systematic in a number of the traditional kind of main templates. And I thought, let's share on that. Let's also get input and feedback and questions and so on and so forth. So before we do that, Brian, welcome. Good to see you. Matthew, long time. Andrew Bonica, howdy. Let's see here, and over here, there we go, in the world of the Tube of You. Hello, G-Man. Hello, Chris. Great to see everybody here. So the interesting thing about all this rig talk is that, there are a couple of different types of templates. So what I want to do at the very top of this is talk about one of the ways to treat your modeling device, because this is one of the areas that, as I've been kind of hanging out in the GT1000 Core universe, and also have been kind of hanging out with my dear friend Helix Rack, there's kind of this big giant volume control. And the temptation is to basically take all of that good stuff and run it straight into, hey, what's going on, Andy Guitar? Thanks for your post, by the way. And just kind of run all that stuff into the front end of your amp. Not so fast. So here's the thing. We're going to break amps down into their various types of categories, because that has an awful lot to do with how you're going to set things up, and also the structure of how you're going to work with drive pedals in the front end of your amp and making sure you're getting the optimal results that you're looking for. So here's the thing. The GT1000 Core has basically this main output, and if you run out of that into the front end of your amplifier and turn that all the screaming way up, it's too hot an input for your amplifier. It's designed to run out into a PA or your DAW. Further, as you turn that thing down or up, there is nowhere in the GT1000 or its deep editor some sort of LED readout as to exactly where that knob was. And genius here, it set up all my sounds and, some drive pedals into the front end of what was the pair of D20s. And I kind of already knew before I turned the control, and as like slow motion, don't. And as soon as I turned it, I was like, yep. So basically, imagine that you've got some giant volume control and a 100-watt amplifier after your favorite drive pedal, but before your amplifier. And that control doesn't really have a kind of a detente setting. It's just way too loud to just blow up the front end of your amplifier, figuratively, not literally. And sure enough, I just went turn, and all of a sudden I went, okay, wow, where was it before? And so not only could I not get back to the place that I'd set all my kind of balance between my drive pedals and the front end of the amplifier, I quickly realized I was just completely distorting the front end of the amplifier. And I was like, right, this thing's meant to, again, go out at line level into a DAW or a PA. It's not meant to be at instrument level going to the front end of the amplifier. So then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second. Okay, there's all these output settings, one of which is like, designed to hit the front end of your amplifier. Sonically, yes. Input level, no. And so the same tendency exists in the world of Helix, where you're turning this thing up and down, unless it's a set level. If it's going into the front end of your amplifier, you do not want it going into the front end of your amplifier, and even then there will be some qualifications thereof. So that is to say, on even just the little GT1000 core, same thing for HX Stomp, whatever it is, unless it's specifically giving you the ability to select an instrument level output, and then the maximum volume is kind of basically what the amp is wanted to see, and you only leave it at the maximum level volume and never touch it, use one of the loops out. The reason you want to do that is that loop is designed to run either, depending on the selection menu, with either line or, because sometimes you might want to run a piece of rack gear, line level gear, in a loop. Most of the time it's going to be running at instrument level, much of the time with these smaller devices, because they're thinking you're going to stick some stomp box in the loop that you want to be able to control via some MIDI message, so on and so forth. So basically in the GT1000 core, I sacrificed actually both loops to go out to the front end of the amplifier. I could actually have done one and then use some sort of AB sort of box to do that. Another way to go. The point being is that then that is a set level. You're adjusting your drive pedals just like you would have a drive pedal. You're sticking it in front of your amplifier at the appropriate level. Super, 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 super important, because that potential for that mistake is something that as all of us endeavor, we get these cute little boxes, and they are very cute and they are very powerful. But keep in mind that they're frequently designed to run into your DAW. Your DAW is not looking for instrument level, it's looking for line level. And so the point being is you want to be really conscious of like, wow, I want to give my amp the front end of what it's experiencing. That is to say, you really just want to go, this is a virtual stomp box. I want it at the same level that my stomp box is running. All right. First of all, let me say hello to a couple of different people here. Okay. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much. Yes. It's not mine. This belongs to Mason at Vertex, and I am making very good use of this. All right. So let's see here. And I've got some mouse issues this evening that things are not wanting to play as friendly as I would like. So let's do a little bit of the stretch there. Matthew, great to see you. Andrew Bonica once again, hello. Gilberto, bienvenidos. Richard Doyle, congratulations, my man. Please talk about Fishman Triple Play. I am not super deep on the Fishman Triple Play as I should be. Ask me that in a month. That sounds really lame, but because it's something I need to be really proficient in, and I'm not. Yes, doesn't have a detectable reference level. No, it does not. Oops. But again, it's designed to give you another option. What's going on, Rick? How you doing, man? Great to see you. Chris Stark, always a pleasure. Stark Industries in the house. Does that ever get old? I hope not. Tim, just you. What's going on? Okay, good. All right, so here's the thing. Is that, again, thinking about what sort of things wanting to go where. So let's dial the clock back to 19 something or other. All right, your average stomp box, is there one that's actually not plugged into anything? Yes, here we go. Your average stomp box is intended to run at instrument level, kind of your guitar running into it, running into the front end of your amp. If you think about the logical flow of this, and I know that 99% of you guys know this, but sometimes, like, the more I'm like, hey, what happens if I turn up the knob? I'm like, oh, I just screwed up every balance. Mike Rand, what's going on? Everything that I just spent all this time setting, and now I can't get back. Do not do that. So this guy, if you think about it, you plug into this guy, and it goes into your amp. So imagine this guy's not there. It's just you and the cable going into the front end of your amplifier. So this is intended to run at instrument level. Your average old school effects loop, back in the day, you would run into something like a Chandler digital echo or anything else that we can see here that'll do. And that is intended to run at line level, a much hotter level. So if you were to stick something like this in the loop, like a traditional delay, like a DD, let me rephrase, a stomp box delay like a DD fill in the blank, you'll notice probably that they have a tendency to brown out. That is to say, you notice like, wow, all my delays sound distorted. It's because you're just bang in the front end of that. Now, I do not know if the newer DD units will brown out in a line level effects loop, and some effects loops have the ability to attenuate the level of the loop. And if I make a mental note, I will talk about, no, you know what, we're at loops here, so let's take a moment. As long as we're there, let's just talk about the loopology. Okay, first of all, if, for example, you grew up only playing through what we're going to call simple amplifiers, of which I adore greatly, of which there's two behind me, they do not have an effects loop. They do not have an extra gain stage. You plug in, and what you see is what you get. You turn the knobs, and it does stuff. There's no push-pull. There are foot switches, but it's the vibrato and the reverb. So the idea is it's just kind of there, right? There's no four-cable method to be had. We'll talk about the Doppler A-B trick in a minute. Mental note, number 2. All right, so the deal is an effects loop basically interrupts the signal between the preamp, the part of the amplifier that creates the sound, and the amplifier, the part that amplifies it. So the idea is, in a general way, especially for us old school, kind of like turn it up, super distorted, you don't want to run a delay traditionally into a distorted amplifier. You want to run it after that preamp section and basically add the delays to that beautiful lead tone and add some soup that you throw on top. You don't want to throw the soup into the front end. That said, if any of you kind of hang out in the praise and worship world, an overdriven, I look over here because I'm looking at my AC30, an overdriven AC30 a la the Edge is a great way to throw an Echoplex into the front end and get it to purposely distort a little bit, which, by the way, was a sound that I was not into for a very long time. I'm like, why would I ever want to do that? Because my idea was like, I'm either playing clean or I'm playing with a ridiculous amount of distortion and soupy delay and reverb. The point being is that when you're dealing with a distorted, like that guy right there, the JP2C, that kind of in its lead or rhythm mode, you want to put the delay in the loop. And in turn, then you want to amplify that. So an effects loop is basically an insertion point in between the preamp, the part that creates the sound, and the power amp. Do you need to use an effects loop if you're just running your amp clean? That is a brilliant question. Somebody asked me that last night. No. There are advantages to both. The idea of taking, for example, can I see? No. Somewhere back there, I've got a couple tape echoes, and taking that tape echo and kind of running that signal into the front end of your amplifier can add another, sometimes depending on how it's set and depending on the level, can add another little drive stage there, which kind of makes the amp kind of go, cool, even more, and things wake up. Cool stuff can happen. Conversely, taking that preamp sound, that pristine sound, and going, okay, now I'm going to add some delay, is another way to do it, so long as the level inside the loop is copacetic with whatever device you've placed there. And generally speaking, an effects loop is running at line level, which means your average stomp that was intended to be on your pedal board, that is to say, your cable is really just kind of drilling a hole right through it on the way to your amplifier. That stuff usually doesn't want to live in the loop. And some devices, like this Strymon stuff, as I recall, has got a selectable level, line or instrument level, which is cool. Be conscious of that. The Eventide stuff as well. To the best of my knowledge, the Eventide Factor series were the first ones to really go all out, both on the input and on the output. You could adjust it to line or instrument level. Okay, I didn't forget effects loops, series and parallel. So what is this series and parallel business? I actually don't know about the effects loop on that amp, but I have, let's see if I can, there we go. Woohoo. So that is actually a JVM 410 JS. And my guess is, and I'm not going to go back there and take a look, it's set up loop-wise like the same as on my JVM 410H, which is you can run the loop in either series or parallel. Now, why would you want to run it in one or the other? The advantage of running it in parallel is you basically can run out and my favorite kind of go-to sit on the top of the amp. And I will be looking at all of this good stuff, answering any questions and taking the feedback. Okay. Okay. So I really like the Eventide time factor for an amp top sitting box, because it doesn't want to fall off a bouncy stage. If you just wanted to put something in the loop, and the other thing then I would do is I would turn it to pure echo and run that in parallel. That is to say, the amp is just cruising along like this, passing signal right on by, and it's also got a feed in parallel that's going to the delay, and then you're just blending in how much of that delay you want with the control that's on the back of the amplifier. For something like a delay, that's perfect. For something like a, I don't know, let's say we had a line level flanger that we want to make everything flangey. In that case, we want it to run in series. That is to say, one into the other. And parallel is the, if you ever get confused about series and parallel, just think about parallel as just two things cruising along side by side, which means series must be one into the other. Okay, a good example of a series sound is one of the things that Mr. Satriani likes to do. He likes to run one delay into the other, and he kind of gets this interactive quality between the delays where they kind of ping, 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 ping. And it's a lovely sound. It's a little bit like reverb, but it's not. It's really running two delays in series. And it's a lovely, lovely, lovely sound. And it also begins to give some of the effect of playing in stereo. Now, years ago, and this all fits together, so bear with me, Mr. Satriani was playing an outdoor festival. Was it a festival? Day on the Green, San Francisco Bay Area. Anybody from the Bay Area, they used to have these great things at the Oakland Coliseum, all these huge bands, and Joe was playing there. And front of house on broadcast for, I think it was radio, they summed Joe's stereo signal to mono. And Joe was not happy because he had this glorious stereo signal that when you sum it to mono, not only kind of compressed it to one track, but if you take stereo chorus and you sum it to mono, generally it doesn't sound great. And in particular, what Joe had with his stereo chorus, it's a CE1, one of the best choruses ever made. In particular, that chorus does not sound great summed to mono. And so Joe basically, I just remember him saying, never again. And from that point on, he basically just plays in dual mono. Multiple amps, but everything's running in mono. So there are, and so let's do talk about phase. So the interesting thing about this particular device here is that it's basically a stereo device in that one of the outputs is pure dry, and the other output is a blend of, depending on where you set the blend control, of totally dry or blending in the desired amount of delay. The interesting thing that happens when you engage this pedal is that the direct signal on one of the sides, and I think it's the side with the delay, flips phase, excuse me. So that is to say, in theory, you've got two, how can I do this not look like an idiot? All right, so you've got two amps that are going like this. They're drawing positive and then drawing negative, drawing positive and drawing negative. What happens when they start going in opposite directions is those waves actually cancel each other out. It's kind of like if you give me $1 and I give you $1, I didn't end up anywhere, and basically means it just goes, your sound goes away, with the exception of any inconsistencies on one or the other side of the wave. So basically what it means is you'll probably hear the delay and the direct signal goes away. So as I was doing tracks with that, I had to be conscious over here on my audio interface to flip the phase on the one of the two, because it doesn't matter which one you do, then they're going to be phase coherent once you actually engage the delay. Or you can see it in Pro Tools and then just flip one of those waves in post. All right, so let me hit the pause button there. Let me just take a look at everything, and I'm going to stop there. Let's do it. I have a triple play. Okay, hang on. So, all right, being called out. I love it. Okay, the Chrome was the culprit. Safari saying, actually, the interesting thing, Chris, Chrome was freaking out on this machine as well. It would not allow me to load this feed over here. So simple amps are the best. Okay, so I think if you said, well, actually would have to go two. If you said, Doug, what are the two best amps on the market? I would say the Rev D20 and the Deluxe Reverb Tone Master. And I would say that in the simple amp, that is to say, no effects loop, no pushy pull stuff, the Tone Master Deluxe Reverb is the most ridiculously amazing amplifier I've ever played. It's modeling. It's got two IRs built in. One is an SM57, depending on which one it is. 57 121, 57 MD 421. And then a third output with no IR, and that's what I'm running out for the Celestion Speaker Mix Pro demo. And I'm just like, I cannot wait for you guys to hear it. It'll be done tonight, and it'll go live tomorrow. I am absolutely amazed at the quality of the sound. Just staggering. Mason, and if I say Mason, we mean Mason from Vertex, has got this lovely late 60s ES335 that I've been playing, and I'm using it on one of the demos, and it's unreal. And then the other one, I was playing the Pink Strat? Yeah, I was playing the Pink Strat, kind of doing this kind of, I was using the Analog Man Kinetone with one of the sides on, and then this lovely, I have no idea what's going to happen when I do this, but let's try it anyway. Let's try that. There we go. No. Okay, hang on. Let's see what happens when we zoom out. Give me a moment. We can fix that. Hey, cameraman, get your act together. There we go. Let's try that. So this little guy here, let's see if we can do that, is this Mtg Tube Tremolo. And then for the rhythm, I was using one side of the Analog Man into Mason Steel String Supreme, and I was getting a wonderfully ridiculous, amazing sound that just kind of like with this guitar in the number 4 pickup selection, and then the lead side, I pulled out the Tube Tremolo, added the second side of the King of Tone, and it's just kind of like all this lovely natural compression, the reverb and the sound of the amp. It's just ridiculous. And then the Celestion plugin. And for that, I'm using the 65 Creamback models with a combination of 57 and 121, kind of my go-to thing. And so using that deluxe reverb just direct out, and just the way that rig sounds is just amazing. Matter of fact, let me just walk through the routing of that, because this is kind of where, again, I woke up this morning like, what can I plug in and how can I route it? So I initially was going to set up both deluxe reverbs, but one of the interesting things, and we're going to do a mini rabbit trail, I'm going to go back in. Hello, Tom. Clean Amp Effects Loop is post EQ. That is correct. So all the groovy stuff tonally is happening. Then you basically have an insertion point after the tone generation and before the power amp section. That is not to say that depending on how hard you drive the power amp, it's not going to change your tone. Color it and add overdrive. But generally, if we were to say, okay, if you think of your average, high gain amp like a Petrucci amp on the second or third channel, what it does in the preamp is kind of akin to a distortion pedal. And what it does in the power amp is you turn it in the upper areas of up is more like an overdrive pedal, because you're overdriving the power amp section, as opposed to creating distortion with the preamp tubes. Kind of a classic example. It's the first time you really somebody shows you like how to create distortion on an amplifier. You turn the master volume all the way down, you turn the preamp all the way up, and then you bring the master volume up slowly, and that all of a sudden like, oh, and that sound is distortion, and it's a lovely thing. The opposite side of that is when you kind of take the preamp and turn it on, about 9 o'clock, and then just dime the master volume. You're just like, it gets really loud. But the other thing is especially as you start to play, you kind of go, oh, there's something unique happening here. The notes kind of begin to kind of back up a little bit as they compress as you play them. All right, so the deal is I'm just basically running all that stuff in line into the front end of the Deluxe, hitting it a little bit, and so it is kind of doing a little bit of what I just described. I'm coming out direct out, going into Pro Tools using my Universal Audio interface. The interesting thing about that plugin, without doing a screen share in this moment, is that you can go into it in mono or stereo. But what the neat thing is, it is a stereo plugin. So as soon as you instantiate it on a channel strip, that channel strip will turn to stereo. So you can start panning stuff left and right. You can put, two cabinets on the left side, one with a 57, the other with a 121, then two cabinets on the other side. And you basically kind of create this stereo image, or you can just create a mono image and then you can place that wherever you want to in the mix. But the idea of that kind of the kind of how do I get from outside of the box to the inside of the box is one of the things that I think all of us are either already encountering, are in the process of encountering, or will encounter as we kind of go, okay, because it and the other part of it is like, well, how do I take my modeler, and this is going to be another part of what we're going to talk about tonight, how do I take my modeler and make it something that I can play, and that's kind of, I guess, where we started, make it play through my amplifier and not have it sound weird. So the short answer to that, since I'm already there, the last record I did just about all the lead tracks on a Boss GT6. And basically, when I went to tour on that record, I toured Europe and I toured the United States. Had my rig changed a little bit I know in Europe, all I did was I used a GT6 into the power amp in. There's a preamp out, power amp in, and that insertion point in between the preamp and the power amp of whatever effects loop, let's say complex amp, the promoters provided. So that was in my rider. They had to provide an amp with an effects loop. And basically I plugged into that and then whatever cabinet was associated with that. And honestly, pretty much from night to night, the power amps changed a little bit and the cabinets changed a little bit. But it was a pretty consistent experience. Loud would be the best word to describe that, but it just worked. And what we're talking about is how does it work. So the idea is, so the simple version is you've got some sort of multi-effects device. What is the easiest way to get it to do something groovy live? Run it into the power amp return of a quote unquote complex amplifier. That's going to get you the best results if you're using amp modeling inside there, and then you're just kind of amplifying that. Do you want to remove, for example, in the Line 6 world, you can run basically an amp and preamp together. You can separate the preamp out with the, there we go, I do have a rev up. If I were going to run into the power amp in on the rev there, and what I've been doing with the Helix rack is I'm just using the preamp model. There's such a nice power amp on the rev there that it sounds as good or better than the ones on the Helix, with the exception of then if I want to do, all right, well, what if I want some sort of non-6v6, and that gets us into the idea, again, now, backing up a step, I'm coming out of the Helix rack, I'm coming into the power amp in, bypassing the preamp, and then I'm opting to not use the power amp model because ideally you don't want to run one power amp into the other in a 20-watt amplifier where you start to turn that up, you hit the headroom pretty quickly. On a 100-watt amplifier, you can get that pretty loud before the power amp starts to go, what are you doing? So when I was touring with the GT6, I was using full amp models there. Into a lower wattage amplifier, I wouldn't do that. Also, with something like the Rev, which has 2 Notes Torpedo remote software, you're able to, in turn, then use a virtual power amp, which you have the ability to assign different types of power amp tubes to, like an EL84 for a Voxy type of sound, which I erroneously couldn't remember what it was, a 34 or an 84 a couple of weeks ago. EL84. You can use a 6L6 inside the torpedo thing. They do not, in this moment, presently have a 6V6, which is the sound of a deluxe reverb. Which, if you're going to say, and I saw this on a thread earlier, okay, well, if I'm checking out the Tone Masters, would you suggest the deluxe or would you suggest the twin? I think the deluxe is, and the 6V6 is, besides the exception of an EL84, is the best sounding tube for a pedal platform. Kind of whatever you stick against it, it seems to work really well. All right. So the idea is that you're then able to create a virtual power amp, which means with Helix again, I don't want to run one power amp into the other, especially in some sort of amplifier that is 20-ish watts. Okay, so let me take a moment and hit the pause button, and let me go ahead and take a look at all the stuff. Paul, hello, Paul. Nice to see you. That's a great question. Did Mr. Satriani play with 2-channel stereo digital echoes? And that's what this little guy over here is in the rack. And was it done in parallel, trying? I am 99% positive that at the point he started using the stereo digital echoes, it was after the quote-unquote stereo incident, which means he would have, I'm nearly positive, been running them in series. But I shall endeavor and find out, because that's a great question. Great question. Trying to understand series versus parallel more. So the idea is that if you run, the simple thing would be if you got 2 delays in the house, run one into the other, run them both so you've still got the direct signal coming all the way through there. And so basically what happens is your direct signal and the delay signal start creating multiple pings inside that second delay, and it just kind of has this multiplying effect, and it gives it almost a reverberous sort of a vibe. It's a really cool vibe. It's kind of one of the reasons, one of my go-to things is I like to use a combination of dotted eighths on the left and a quarter note on the right. Even though they're separate, they're still, again, if you think about hard left and hard right, well, you still hear stuff in the center. It's not like it evaporates, and so there is a little tiny bit of the fact that you hear things with both ears simultaneously. You're registering that equipment, or sorry, that information simultaneously. That's different than putting them in one channel, though. Live or studio application. Please clarify which you mean. Okay, all right. Let me jump over here to the tube of view here real quick, and let me see what other groovy things are hanging out up there. Okay, all right. All right. All right. Oh, this boy, all sorts of cool stuff. Okay. Nice to see everybody. Salutations. Hey, Dop. That's awesome. All right. Hello, 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 hello. Mike Rand, always a pleasure. Okay. G-Man is pointing out the DD 20 has a +4, -10 input setting. And that is for the loop itself. That's not the front end of the amplifier. But what that means is the -10 is obviously a lower setting, and the +4 is a hotter setting. And I believe that respectively refers to line +4 and instrument -10 level. Does cable length between head and cabinet make a difference in tone? Wow, what a great question. I think let's back that up a little bit. And everybody has had a cable at one point or another. And I've generally used good quality cables, but traditionally the place that I've broken cables is I'll step on a cable on stage and I'll turn, and not at the jack, but somewhere in the length of the cable, that cable will there'll be a break in usually what I think is going to be the shield. That is to say, there's kind of a core and then there's a shield, a copper braid that goes around that, and I think I stretch and snap that shield. Although I could be wrong, maybe the core. The point being is that once you have a cable start to break, you begin to appreciate the concept of an unbreakable or a higher quality cable. I've almost always used high quality cables. Yes, there is a difference. My buddy Mason will have a long conversation with you about the evils of of solderless cables. As I recall, Eric Johnson uses the what are the red little skinny cables, which I think are solderless cables. I could be wrong. But the point being is that the reality is that you want, one of the things about solder is that it is a more reliable connection. You're basically kind of creating a metal glue, if you will, that's holding that in place, and it also has conductive quality. So solder is a good thing. I just am absolutely inept with a soldering gun. It's just kind of like, give me a guitar pick, give me a guitar, give me an Allen wrench, and maybe even a screwdriver. That's great, but stick a soldering gun and solder in my hands, I'm useless. So there are just certain things that I just don't touch. But the quality of the cable is a very, very important thing, and it's a funny thing. The Boss guys, and again, a bunch of you guys I know from these guitar camps, the Boss guys showed up at the Vi Academy, no, G4 Experience in Carmel, like 3 years ago with these Boss cables, and I'm like, great. What the world needs now is another, is a Boss guitar cable. I just remember chuckling, but when it was time that they were giving out the cables, I was like, well, I'll take like 5 of them. They're some of the best cables I've ever used. I can't mention the high fidelity brand that they mentioned that are basically the equivalent of those cables. They're phenomenal cables. I've had yet to have one break. They're totally reliable, and I love them. So stupid me. So a high quality cable definitely is going to change the way it sounds. And I've used Mogami a lot. I like the Boss as much as the Mogami. You get what you pay for with the cables, and they do sound a little bit different. Is it something that once a band starts playing super, 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 super loud that you're ever going to notice? I don't know. Joe gets by just fine with the Planet Wave solderless cables that Mike screws together. His tech, that is. And, his tone's not sucking. So, that is to say, cables absolutely matter. Cable length matters. Now, here's the interesting thing is you generally don't want to go, as I recall, the magic number is about 18 feet. And what ends up happening is that basically starts to load, it creates an impedance where it basically reduces the thing that I understand it reduces the most first is the high end. Now, let's just back up a step. I have never heard a sound man say to the guitar player, hey, can you give me some more high end? I'm just not getting enough high end on the 57. Like, it's never happened. So the irony is that what we're looking for is the fidelity of the signal. And that is one of the interesting things, again, in having been in this, and this is kind of one of the unique things about just living in the box with IRs, is when you don't have an actual cabinet hooked up to your amplifier, does it sound like that same speaker cabinet combination would in the room with that mic in front of it, or does it sound different? I've got the cab clone. Sorry, my bad. I was getting my boogies and my two notes mixed up. The Torpedo Captor X. So I'm using that on the Petrucci amp, and I am getting the most ridiculous 8-string tone. That first demo I done on the 8-string was okay. The sound that I'm getting is just super important thing about working with IRs when you're in the box in the room. And this was the big mistake I made with that first 8-string track. Any of you that saw it, Soundman, hey, guitarists use a 50-foot cable, and a 50-foot cable will reduce that. Now buffers actually help a lot. But that is shell pink might be my color. Hello, Lewis. I love this guitar. The funny thing is, Melissa, my wife, when she kind of saw this pink guitar show up, I pretty much saw this thing. Hey, Brenton, what's going on, my man? I saw this and I was like, it's how do I say this? No, I'm not going to say it. Well, I will say it. I'm kind of already out there. You won't probably catch me wearing a pink sweater. Just saying. Like, pink ain't my thing unless it's a guitar. And then I'm like, oh, just love it. So in any case, and there's nothing wrong with a pink sweater if that's your thing. So please, do not. And then the next time you don a pink sweater, just think of me and just go, Doug's got your back. So the moving right along, and pink guitars. Yes, right, Andrew Monica? We love our pink guitars. All right, there we go. Yes, longer cable increases capacitance and rolls off the high end. And there we have it. Okay, so let me just back up a little bit here. Hello, Lewis. Lewis and I, speaking of loud, Brent, again, great to see you. Lewis, my colorist says I'm more of a Fiesta Red kind of guy. Only your colorist knows. So, The Lewis and I, like some of you have heard before, played in a band called Rampage, and I think I was probably the one responsible for that name. And we won the Head Royce ninth grade talent show in the school newspaper afterwards. They said, the most. I think the way they said it was the most impressive thing about this band was the sheer volume at which they played, and it must have been enough to impress the judges because they won. Lewis and I knew loud. Lewis, was that the Silvertone? Were you playing the Silvertone? What would I have been? I would have been playing the PV. At this period of time, this is long before the 5150. I went through a string of PV amps and I was blowing them up because of the sheer volume. It was a thing. Yeah. Good times. All right, there we go. Eats the EQ. Yes. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. All right. Pink Sweater Lobby is horribly offended. That is true. Speaking of pink, I actually think the pink Pia is the best looking of the bunch. Fight me no out loud. Lewis, yes, that was the Silvertone. Boy, we were loud. And, the drummer, I remember, Ted is his first name. I actually remember his last name. Love the PV amp. Loud AF. No, yours sounded good. Mine sounded Oh, with my OD 250. Oh my word! Now we're going way back. And Lewis, you had that natural top, or maybe it had been sanded Les Paul custom. Oh boy, the Deuce and the Mace rocked. Oh, Brian, I'm going to hate to disagree with you terribly. I blew up more Deuces than Maces. Those guys, I literally blew up a PV about every 2 weeks, and it was the Deuce and the Mace. I just blew those things up. It was just funny. And the TNT, yes. Oh my word! I knew all the PVs in those days. All right, let's back up a step. DD20 has a +4, -10 setting. Thank you, G-Man. Okay, good. So cable length, yes, it does matter. Use good cables. Keep them about underneath 18 feet. Now, here's the other thing: is like, say you've got a long run. This is a classic example of where a buffer can help. And a tuner, your average Boss tuner's got a buffer in it. So that's why it's good to have a Boss tuner on your pedal board if buffers are something that you can deal with. And we're not going to have the fuzz pedal conversation. I'll bring Mason in for that. But let's say you've got a delay, and for example, the DD20 or any of the ones that can run at +4 or can run at line level, but you want to have it on the floor. So for example, the DD20, it's a dual pedal, so you've got a tap tempo function in there where you can tap in it. So the Instinct, unless you want to run a cable, because my as I recall, it's got an aux jack, so you could run a tap tempo cable from that delay, I think. The point being, on some of the other delays you can. Rather than having that thing back there by the amp, for example, the time factor, I just let the time factor I had it on a dual delay, and it actually was just kind of doing that kind of slightly Satriani-esque thing where it was I think 300 and 450, which is kind of this nice kind of little offset. So the idea though, so what if you want to run a cable from your effects loop to a delay that's on your board back to the effects loop, or maybe there's a delay in a reverb, right? All of a sudden you 18 feet one way and 18 feet the other, you're at 36 feet. So, the idea is that if you hear it and it bothers you, then it bothers you. And if it doesn't bother you, then it's fine. Wait a second. 98.5 KOME. Don't touch that dial it's got. Not going to say it. All right. Many modern amps have both effects loop options, which is really helpful sometimes depending on what's in the loop. Absolutely. I love that about the JVM 410H. And one of the things that I noticed that when I was running my time factor in the loop of the Marshall and I was running it in series, there was this weird phase thing happening with the direct signal. So that was one of the reasons I went, well, I guess I'm going to start running in parallel. And that problem went away, and you just literally get rid of the direct signal and it goes away. This is interesting. Devin Townsend runs a delay into a reverb, into a delay, and gets this epic, washy, ethereal sound. Devin marches to his own drummer in a very good way. That Memory Man should be late 70s, maybe early 80s. And it's a great little pedal. And yes, it is old, like me. Oh, that clip. What's going on, Poo Ninja? How you doing, man? Good to see you. Rev D20. I wish it was cheaper. I would definitely get one. Well, I would say for the money, it's a whole ton of value. So if and when the time is right, it's great. And I know my buddy Mike is Mike Rand's going, when are you going to get the G20 so you can check that out? An affordable way to go is Captor X or a Sir reactive load with your amp. Absolutely. So the Captor X, and just so everybody knows, I'm not going to get into a dissertation about loads. That is to say, most amplifiers have a very specific cabinet with which they are intended to be paired, unless it's a combo. And there's still kind of a load that's the speaker impedance with which that combo is paired, or that 412 cabinet. So your average Marshall generally wants to run at 16 ohms into a 412 cabinet with 16 ohm speakers set at 16 ohms. So that's kind of that thing. The Boogie stuff likes to run at 8 or 4, generally speaking, along the lines of the Fender world. And so the thing about the Captor X, there's a 16 ohm version that's here somewhere, and then there's the 8 ohm version that's right there. You do not want to mix them up. And the other thing in the directions there that you want to be conscious of with Captor X is don't run your amp all the way up. Because sometimes they're only designed to handle 100 watts, and sometimes a 100 watt amplifier actually puts out more juice than 100 watts. And you do not want to put the X through your Captor X. Mike Mitchell, what's going on? Nice to see you, my friend. Always a pleasure. The DD20 can work with a line level or instrument loop. Burn back to the Planet Waves American stage cables are great, and they've got kind of these nicer, larger plugs, kind of a black plastic plug, and they're really high quality cables. The Satriani ones are actually the Planet Waves instrument cable kit versus the American stage cables, but my guess is no. Actually, I think it's a different wire. But again, the interesting thing about Joe's, one of his big influences is Jimi Hendrix, and like Hendrix was back there measuring his cables hardly. It's just like he was just plug it in, turn it up. Can I talk more on the new Celestion cab plugin? How does it compare with the 2 notes cab modeling or the aux? Okay. Yes. Let's do this. Jeff, thanks so much. Enjoying the show. So the Celestion plugin, it is, well, first of all, that video will go live tomorrow, God willing. What I absolutely love about it, and this is not here's the thing. I am uniquely positioned with a ridiculous amount of gear that I've kind of collected over the years, including 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 speaker cabinets in the house. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 in storage. There's another one in the box there. Right. So the point being is that of all those 412 cabinets, every single one of them's got Celestines in it. Every single one. Some vintage 30s, some greenbacks, mostly 30s. I think I've got that vintage tall cabinet right there has got 25s, a reissue. So the point being is that what I am enamored about the Celestion folks, and they're being so cool, is that they kind of, part of what I do is I work in digital media, and my boss, one day I went to him, this is relevant, and I said, with all we're spending on printing and shipping and all of this stuff, how much do you spend every month versus how much we actually make on the printed issues? And he did the math, and the next day we killed print. Not that Celestion has stopped manufacturing traditional speakers, but it takes a lot of cojones to actually go, we're going to actually jump in on the IR game. One could argue that there's a little tiny bit of cannibalism that's happening with your own bottom line, but they very clearly saw the writing on the wall and just went, we're jumping in. And so what's neat about this plugin is it's utilizing their DSR's, dynamic speaker responses, which is basically, and this is something that along the lines, because it's one of the things that really appealed to me. There was a period of time I got really way into, a buddy of mine loaned me his Axe FX 2, and I just kind of went way deep. And one of the things about the Fractal stuff is they've got something called Speaker Drive, and I believe it's still going to be called Speaker Drive. And that's literally how much you're beating up the speaker cabinet. And why this matters is that, for example, the AC30 that's over there, if I'm playing quietly through that amp, the speakers are just kind of purring along. If I turn that thing up, I want to be able to make that, make the speakers kind of do the thing that they would do, and they behave differently. And it's an interesting thing as I've kind of worked with the Z curve inside there, taking it up or down, and then blending it. I've discovered that it's interesting how different speakers respond differently. The vintage 30s like to be beaten up a little bit. It's an interesting thing that the Celestian Blues have a tendency to actually, to my taste, they get a little bit, that I'm not as happy with what they do when you start turning that Z curve up. So I like to run them a little bit cooler, but beating up the vintage 30s and beating up the 65s, which is what I was using, Creamback 65 with these guys, or I should say with that guy. It's like, oh, that's a lovely speaker. So the idea is you can set up 6 speakers, cabs, and microphone chains. And then where traditional Celestians have set points that kind of go from, and I forget the names, but it's something the equivalent of thin to dark. And then there's fat, and then there's balanced. But those are set designation points. What's neat is you can run the slider there. You can save them as presets. You can set an A and a B preset within a single instantiation of the plugin. And so what's really neat about it is that the 2 Notes Captor X, and this, so we're gonna let me zoom out for just a second. Increasingly, guitar players are going to be faced with the choice of stereo, and along the line, George L. Thank you, Mike Mitchell. That was the Eric Johnson red cable, by the way. So there are some considerations when playing in stereo, of which I basically love the idea of playing in stereo so long as you're conscious of what happens when you sum things back to mono. And the idea is that it's nice to be able to layer things and then get slightly different things happening on the left and the right. Or, say for example, these 2 amps that are behind me, they're 1 model year apart. My guess is if I set them at identical settings, they'd sound a little tiny bit different. First of all, they have different speakers. So let's just say I'm running direct out using the SM57 model or using the lack of IR. They'd be very similar, but my guess is that they may not sound identical. They might have changed the value of some part that they maybe weren't able to get from some destination. Small, subtle stuff that, most people would never, ever notice. But, in the process of that, it made a subtle change. And maybe it was something they wanted to improve. Regardless, and if you put up 2 amplifiers, pan 1 left and pan 1 right, if they were identical and the levels were identical, they would sum together in the center. And so long as they were in phase, it would basically sound like mono. That is to say, if I took a mono signal, split it in half, and pan it to the left and pan it to the right, you wouldn't hear it on the left and the right, you just hear it in the center. It would just be twice as loud. And I actually had that happen today as I was doing something. I was like, it's louder, but it's not stereo. I'm like, oh, right, I unmuted something that was a duplicate, and it was just twice as loud. And it was like, it's twice as loud, but it's not separated, and it was because of the way I had it panned. The point being is that stereo allows you to take advantage of the fact that the majority of the records we listen to, there's stereo action going on. the interesting thing about, let's go back to Joe Satriani for a moment. My guess is that there are stereo things happening around the effects that they're using with Joe. But if you listen to Joe's sound, you'll notice that it's this very front and center sort of a thing. And the idea is that he's the lead vocalist, and that's one of the reasons that I love using guitar in stereo, is that, especially when I'm working with a vocalist in some setting or another, it's nice to be able to wrap them and leave them center channel and then kind of wrap with the left and the right, or use stereo effects that kind of give the illusion that I'm kind of wrapped in the left and the right. So the thing about the two notes, and I've spent a lot of time inside the two notes thing, the two notes thing has power amp modeling, it has reverb, and that's just two notes torpedo that comes with it. I have opened up the Captor X. I don't even know if it's still. Are you instantiated? Yeah, you are. Okay, there we go. So it's got wet and dry on the enhancer. Oh God, it's an enhancer. There's EQ. There's reverb. And then there's the built-in IRs, and then the microphones, and the cabinets. So there's a whole world of stuff going on inside the Two Notes Torpedo software. That's all great. Like, I've spent a lot of time over the past month really just kind of going, it's just great. The cabinets sound great. And it's just, especially with the D20, the ability to either use the tap. So on the direct out, you have the ability to switch in or out the power amp from the direct out signal chain, which means then if you bypass the power amp, then you can use a virtual power amp inside the Two Notes Torpedo remote software. Hang on, does this one? Give me a moment. Okay, right. Captor X does not have the amp model, the power amp modeling, at least as far as I could tell by a quick meander through, where Two Notes Torpedo Remote does, because the idea is for the D20, they wanted you to have the ability to load that stuff. What I don't know, and I should, is if the Two Notes Wall of Sound plugin has power amp modeling as well. So again, the place that this becomes valuable is, say you want to come out of your Helix, and you want to have the ability I'm not going to do it now. I should know this. You want to have the ability you want to have the ability to separate out the preamp and then use the virtual power amp inside the Two Notes Torpedo Remote. It's a really nice function, especially when I'm using the Helix into the power amp in on the D20, or just using the Helix's effects into the front end of the D20. Regardless, having the option of including the 6v6 power amp, or if I'm trying to go for something that's maybe more voxy, then being able to use the EL84 power amp section, virtual power amp section, that's great. The Celestion stuff does not have that. What it does have is room reverb that you can add, and they've got a really nice sounding room that's in there, and it sounds ridiculous. And the big thing about the DSRs is that they call them dynamic speaker responses, where, and this is one of the things that I'm going to be doing tonight, sooner than later, is being the DSRs and the IRs. And the interesting thing is you can use the Z drive on the traditional static IRs, but a static IR is really capturing a speaker in a photograph, where the DSR is a little bit more like a movie, where when you're playing a speaker, first of all, the envelope is opening and closing, but the harder you hit that speaker, the different the behavior. When you play an IR, that behavior does not change. So it's almost as if, it's just this static thing. And so the DSRs, this is kind of where the technology is really getting, is where these digital models, the GT1000 core does it really well, surprisingly well, where you're kind of feeling this thing push back on you because of their tube logic software, they figured out some stuff, and that's on the Boss side. With the Celestian side of things, these DSRs that you can actually feel what the amp is doing and the cabinet are doing as they're pushing back underneath the strings. It's an interesting phenomenon, and kind of as I kind of been beating up the vintage 30s with the 8-string. That was the thing I did this afternoon. Before that was the last demo I did today. When you guys hear that, hopefully you'll be half as enamored as I am. This gets back to this other thing. Very, very important thing about that I learned with that first 8-string demo. It's really natural to want to turn things up to amp volume when you're tracking and listening back to IR stuff. But what I discovered, and I'm usually a pretty good judge as I listen back, when things are loud, you, first of all, respond to just the excitement of the volume in the room. Second of all, you hear, because everything's louder, you can hear more nuance. So it means more of the things that you're listening for are there. And in theory, it also means the things that are offensive, you will notice more. But as I played that last 8-string sample and I brought the volume down and I listened to it at choir volume, I'm like, what was I thinking exactly? So now as I've been working with these different IR things, I have no problem tracking with some volume. But then especially on the 8-string where getting the bottom end right, but making sure the top end doesn't get fizzy, no fault of the IRs. It's just a matter of the fact that I need to make sure that I'm listening, and because this gets back to this whole thing about the routing of using the JP2C into the Captor X. There is a voicing control on the face of the Captor X. Well, I've got that set at high noon, but that voicing really kind of goes from dark to lighter. It's along the lines of one of the things that was on the Palmer, which is kind of my foray into, besides a really bad Behringer box, it was terrible. Little red box. Somebody out there's got it. But the idea is the Palmer kind of had a couple of filters, so I think you could press a button. It was either basically dark or bright or something like that. And it was one or the other. So this is a rotary thing. That gets you into the kind of like, well, where is north? And so part of this is that, a bunch of the stuff that I'm doing, I'm just starting off in the box, which means you just kind of go, we'll just make it sound good. But there is that point of like, okay, well, what's it going to sound like when I plug in an amplifier and, and take the same settings? Is it going to be like some other thing? So what we're believing is the third video in the Celestian thing, the fourth video, is going to be talking about how to take this plugin. There's an application called Gig Performer from my friends at Brainworks that basically allows you to use all your studio plugins on a laptop in a live setting. So the fourth video is going to be what happens when you take it out live, which is going to be pretty exciting. I'm stoked about that. Okay, let's see. So to wrap that back up, the Waza Tube amp expander, first of all, one of the cool things about that, it's got an SDE 3000 built into it. Spent some time hanging out there, spent some time hanging out with the aux. What I love about the aux is that it's got all the UA stuff in there. So, again, kind of getting back to this kind of like how you can take your studio stuff and bring it out onto a stage. The EMT 140 reverb is the best sounding reverb ever made, in my opinion. Just a great sounding plate reverb. And that reverb is the one that was actually at the plant. So if you think about rumors, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself from anybody who heard me go on, that's the one at the plant, it was played on rumors, but I was like, it was a reverb used on a bazillion million selling records. And it's just a great sounding example of that. And you pull it up. Let's talk routing for just a second. So let's talk, because there are going to be some of you that you're about to endeavor into the recording world, especially since we're talking about this plugin. Say you want to use some wet effect like a delay or reverb in the studio. And let's say, for example, I want to take my dry guitar, bring it in, through, whether it's from the Boogie and using the Captor X, or whether it's from the Fender using the direct out. And then from there, on the plug-in, after the speaker IRs are on there, taking a tap from that and then sending that to a bus. It just means you're busing it somewhere, and you're using a bus to send it to an auxiliary track, and there you load a quote-unquote instance of a delay or reverb, and you set that to totally wet. And then you got to make sure you, on your original track, there's usually a little fader that's always set to 0. You got to remember to bring that up. Usually, when set to nil, and you got to remember to bring that up to 0, because otherwise, like, I set it up right and there's no sound. It's like, oh, I forgot to turn the fader's always set all the way off. I don't know why they do that. They have a reason. But then, then what you do is then you use that delay or that reverb on that auxiliary track, which is fed through an auxiliary bus coming off of the feed from an existing channel. And then you run that completely wet. And all you do is you bring that fader up, and all you get is delay or reverb. You don't need more direct signal because that's already present. This is one of the reasons why in a guitar rig, the idea of having a dry and wet setup, where one side's dry and the other side is wet, gives your sound person the ability to make sure that the nice transient attack of your dry signal is first and foremost, and then they can blend in the wet to taste. If everything has already wet, when you place that in the mix, the sound person, when they go to push the guitar forward, they not only get the transient, but say, for example, you've played something in measure 2, the delay and the reverb from measure 1 is spilling over. So it means that after that initial transient, that is to say that attack, I probably just peaked that, all other transients have got some soup on them. So the ability to go, here is soup-free direct signal, and here's the soup, you can blend them to taste. It's not my favorite way to set stuff up, but I've certainly set stuff up in the past like that, and it definitely works. So getting back to the UA stuff, the thing that I understand is the one thing about the UA box is the way the reactive load interacts with your amplifier is that it's basically using the power amp speaker interaction from a deluxe reverb. So it means that if you use it for a Marshall, it's not a one-to-one thing. The Waza Tube Amp Expander, there's a range of things that you can set, and I think that's what they refer to as presence and resonance, but it's basically you can set them such that it emulates certain specific power amps, and the way they're going to interact with the speaker, such you've got this reactive load that is arguably a little bit more reactive based on the right kind of reactive load based on the amplifier that you're using. At the end of the day, if you like the way it sounds and feels, that's the most important thing. And I used the I used the aux on my deluxe reverb, and it sounded amazing. I also used it on my Princeton 1964 hand-wired reissue. Sounded amazing. So it's just like, and as it turns out, those are deluxe-ish kind of amplifiers, but, it sounded ridiculous. So backing up, the Celestion plugin is nuts. That demo should be live sometime tomorrow. And I'm playing a pretty wide range of styles. I'm playing this kind of, thanks to the Steel String Supreme, I'm playing this kind of jazzy with a hint of John Mayer kind of clean thing with the 335. I'm playing this Jeff Becky thing with this guy, with the Analog Man King of Tone. There is the Les Paul, and I'm doing this very Joe Bonamassa influence thing with Helix Rack. And then there's the 8-string on the Petrucci amp. So, like, I'm really, one of the things that, just for the sake of conversation, if you think about all the music you write, most of us have a tendency to write about 4 or 5 songs over and over, at least I do. So I have to be really, really conscious of forcing myself to try different instruments in different combinations. So the 8-string, the Petrucci guitar into the Petrucci amp is such a home run. I just kind of play the same riffs over and over, so I just kind of went, all right, Doppler, put it down, grab the 8-string, be a man. You weren't as happy with that clip when you listened back to it quietly as you wanted to be. Be a man and figure this thing out. And I'm glad that I did, And then what's interesting is that I've become so reliant on this broadcaster because in the middle position it is the most ridiculous tone, but in a sense it's almost become a crutch because it sounds so amazing. I can go to it and it always sounds amazing. Well, it means that that's something else that I'm not going to, that I'm going to have to do a little bit of work for. And doing some work is the name of the game. That the bottom Massa-esque track has got this on this little rhythm guitar part. The interesting thing is that at one point sooner than later, one of the things we'll talk about is meter and time and subdivisions because it's such a rich topic. But I kind of played this little thing, and all of a sudden I'm like, at first I was like, oh, it's in 6/8. I'm like, no, that's 6/4. And I wasn't even conscious of it. It was a very interesting thing as I just kind of played the part. And all of a sudden I went, oh, that's kind of cool. Simply because, most of the time, most of us stay in 4. And if we play something that's in an odd meter, we're usually really conscious of like, oh, I'm going to play something in 13/8, as opposed to like, you just start playing it, all of a sudden you're like, and it kind of 6/8's got this kind of lilt to it that's really lovely. And so I could kind of tell, oh, it's got a lilt to it. And then all of a sudden I'm like, that's not 6/8, that's 6/4. And especially as I kind of went to go, well, now I have to write a little bit of a drum pattern. All that to say, it is a great plugin. It comes with 10 different speaker cabinet combinations. So you can choose 10 different speakers, each of which comes with one cabinet option. And if you're looking for suggestions, that's one of the things I will mention in the video, I would suggest going with a 412 greenback. And just in general, I mean, like, just out of the box, the 412 greenback is kind of a must thing to have. And regardless of who it is, one with a 57, one with a 421. I really like the Creamback 65. That sounds great for the Bonamassa thing. I also... no, was that what I used for that? I'll have to go back in and take a look. That's what I used for the Fender thing, for the Jeff Beck thing, and for the kind of the quote-unquote John Mayer thing. I was like, oh, that sounds great. And the reason I use that is Robin Ford uses 65-watt Celestians. I don't think they're the Creambacks, but that's why I got those. I got those in a 212 open back cabinet because that's what was kind of with the Dumble. So that was kind of my Dumble-ish sound. And then got to have a 212 Celestian Blue a la Vox AC30 and a 212 Greenback so you can blend those two together, in my opinion. And then also the G12H. That is in more combos that I've got here, especially the higher end combos. It's become the go-to speaker because it's a great speaker. So that in a 112 open back. So I've kind of got all the flavors that I would potentially want to go to kind of out of the box. Okay, good. All right. Do I use a Boss speaker cable from amp to cab, though? That's a great question. No. I got some really nice high-end DiMarzio speaker cables that are like that big. And so they're just so darn good. And then because it's got a load on it right now, I want to be very careful about grabbing a hold of it. Let's see if I can do this without breaking anything. There we go. All right. And I don't remember exactly where these cables came from, but they are super duper heavy duty 25-foot speaker cables, and that's what I'm using for the longer runs. I don't remember where they came from. They're great cables. I've had them for 15 or so years. Been on the road with them a bunch, and they sound great. Super duper. Great question. All right, there we go. Andy Guitar. In a nutshell, parallel effects loop. The preamp signal is split before the effects send, which one part send directly into the power amp, the other runs to the effects loop, which should have a kill dry function. Thank you very much. And if not a kill dry function, that is to say, like the Strymon pedals have this little thing that's kill dry. The other thing you can do is just turn the effect all the way 100% wet. which in theory kills the dry signal, but not always. Hence why it's nice to have a kill dry switch. I'm not correcting, I'm just adding. Well done. Oh, all right. What's my first instinct? Fuzz or overdrive? Okay, great question. Up until the point that okay, that's actually pretty easy. Overdrive. But one of the things that Mason, we did this video for the Steel String Supreme, and again I blabbed about it last week or whenever the heck it was, where we're kind of going after the Eric Johnson vibe, and it was totally confronting, terrifying, but I like a challenge. So one of the things is Mason loaned me, and it's still here, is his early 70s fuzz face, and that stacked with the Tube Screamer, which again, there you go, there's your overdrive. I was like, oh, it's a great sound. So, and I haven't always been a total fuzz fanatic. I have a big muff, but it was more of a gentle distortion than a traditional fuzz. I know that's funny to say, but so generally overdrive, simply because it's kind of a piece that's in my toolkit. The King of Tone, there it is. So yes, overdrive, but I and some fuzzes are a little overly sputtery, but that combination of the fuzz face and the TS10 was magical, and that wasn't the TS on its own. Salmon, thank you very much. What about gauges? So unfortunately, when it goes, and we're talking about gauge wire, and that includes the speaker wire, I'm completely inept when it comes to gauges, and I apologize. What other platforms am I streaming on? Obviously, you're on YouTube, so that's Facebook. Because you're like, he's looking over here somewhere. What's this guy doing? Is that ozone? Oh no, that's the magic smoke. Wire gauge. No, I knew what you meant. All right. Voice coil whine tension differentials noticeable on psychoacoustic inference. Yes. So basically, hang on. There we go. So the deal is that I listened. I've got a. It's an interesting thing. These Presonus speakers, the Aris E8s, came in for review, and I was like, yeah, whatever. It's just like because in the past, Presonus has not really been, I don't know, a premium brand, but they came in and I plugged them in and I played my guitar through them. I was like, I must own these. By the way, I missed a couple of must-owns last week. So one, and it's because I actually can't see them, my isoacoustic speaker stands and amp stands, but in particular, the speaker, my near-field monitors, I will never use anything other than the isoacoustic stands. They are an invaluable part of my process. So, and these Aris E8s have become, I've got a second pair of them. I've got the E8 XTs upstairs. They sound like my guitar. I don't want monitors. I'm going to go, well, okay, if I put a piece of tissue tape over the tweeter, talking about my old NS10s, which I've still got, they sound like my guitar. If I get a good sound on these, I get in my car, it sounds like that. Chris Stark, you know what I'm talking about, baby. Chris was having a meltdown about the fact that Apple has made it really, 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 really difficult to load anything other than Apple Music into your phone or your. I just don't know what. Yeah, I'm not going to go there. All right. Yes. So, sorry, back to this voice coil, whine, tension differentials, noticeable or psychoacoustic inference. Having a great set of monitors that aren't coupled with whatever surface they're on is a really, really important thing. Because then you kind of go, again, it's like this whole thing is like, well, if I'm at the point that I'm not using the cabinet and I've got the amp set at a particular place, is that what the amp actually sounds like if I were to play through that actual cabinet? And, I spent a lot of time in years past getting a sound and then trying to plug in some sort of, IR loading speaker emulation thing, and was so frustrated I couldn't match the sound of what was in the room. That, and so now I'm just kind of going, well, I'm just going to plug it in, I'm going to make it work. But that question is still there. And yes, what's going on, Matthew? Yes, DSRs are awesome. So tomorrow that demo should be live. 8 string into a Vox. No, I was not running the 8 string into a Vox. You're a funny guy. Okay, so the interesting thing about turning things up was here we go. Yes, so the thing is that there are times you just want to turn it up and feel the excitement, but with the 8 string, kind of, I think you get to a certain point and it's just so loud you lose definition, but you're having a great time rocking out. Then I listened back to it quiet and I played that clip, last week or the week before, and I just kind of went, sounds ragged. Like I would be crushed if somebody said, yeah, Doppler's tone's a little ragged. I'm just like, that's like, fizzy and ragged are 2 words that I don't really ever want to have associated with what I'm going for, because I'm if fizzy and ragged are your thing, that's awesome. But it's not something that I'm going for. By the way, I think the look of a tuner on a headstock is the stupidest thing ever. But I have to say, I love these headstock tuners. But I think it looks really dumb. Just saying. Okay. Yes, Ford uses the 65, but I don't think he uses the creambacks. I tell you what, G-Man, does he use the creambacks or just regular 65? And they do sound great with Fenderish amps. With great pleasure. I'm looking forward to it too. Sorry, I could only use 200 letters. All right, let me look over here on Facebook. All right, he's dead on about amps exceeding their rating. Best to run 2 attenuators as if 2 cabs set impedance appropriately. Thank you. Chris Stark, I believe Wolfson has the power amp modeling. I think it does too. Tom Atkins, hello. All right, at 7:22, I have a lot of work to do this evening before I call it a day. And so what we're going to do is in the next few minutes, we're going to wrap things up. So let me just take a look around and make sure that I haven't missed any of the important things that I wanted to cover. 4 cable method. And I actually made a list of topics here. Okay, yeah. So this is so let's talk about the 4 cable method. The concept is this. If you think about the sorts of effects that you want to run into the front end of a distorted amplifier, your wah-wah, arguably a flanger in your chorus, an overdrive to a clean amplifier. Then the stuff ideally you want to place after the preamp, especially when it starts to get driven, your delays and your reverbs. So that separation of stuff that you put before the amp, stuff that you place in the effects loop after the preamp. So if you think about the cable that runs to your pedal board, the cable that runs from your pedal board to the amp, the cable that runs from the effects loop to your time-based effects typically, and the cable that runs back from those, when you start doing the math, you end up with 1, 2, 3, 4 cables. Hence the 4 cable method. And the idea is just enabling you run your guitar into basically a pedal board, that pedal board into the front end of the amplifier, the preamp out to time-based effects that in theory are running at the appropriate level for your loop, and that cable back in there. Guitar to pedal board to amp, amp to time-based effects back. I should say preamp out to time-based effects back to the power amp in, which is that insertion point, and it's there. There's nothing super complicated about it, but if you've never done it before or don't have an amp with a master volume, 4 cable method or 4 CM is potentially quite terrifying because you're like, I don't know what it does. Yeah, there we go, regular 65s. By the way, we're talking about Robin Ford. Still, all right. So this next thing is like, well, okay, well, what about these full range flat response powered cabinets? What do we do then? Okay, well, that, again, is kind of going back to that touring experience of going through Europe and just running into the power amp in on a 100-watt amplifier. Yes, by the time I was playing it at stage volume, I was making that power amp, and those speakers work for that matter. But generally speaking, you can just run your whole kit and caboodle, preamp model, power amp model into those things and just treat it like it's a little baby PA that you roll around with you. And in that instance, That's specifically when you want to come out of the main outputs and use that big giant knob to turn things up and down. And that is why, generally speaking, the place that I have a tendency right now, it's at about 1155 for the big knob on the helix there. I don't turn it all the way up. I want to leave myself some room such that if I get to a particular sound that for some reason is particularly quiet, I can bring that up, and I've got room to go in either direction. Chris, my interview with Kenny Wayne Shepherd in Worship Musician Magazine is great. I encourage everyone who likes the show to check it out. Doug's work for the magazine. Thank you very much. I will actually probably go ahead and post. Well, first of all, I did a video interview with Kenny, which is on the Facebook, the YouTube page for Worship Musician, but it's not. It's listed. It's unlisted. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Kenny Wayne Shepherd guitar review, and I'll bring Kenny into that interview virtually. But he was an exceedingly nice guy, knows his stuff. His guitar is amazing. That bluey, whatever it is, it's over there somewhere. And thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. He's a lovely guy, brilliant guitar player. GT12s on an open setting will make your knees shake. Steve Serena, what's going on, my man? Good to see you. Speaking of another one of my loud cohorts, Steve was a member of Doppler Inc. for, 4 years, 3 years, something like that. Played a bunch of shows. Good to see you, my man. Great to see you, actually. All right. Those little headstock tuners are so distracting. They're totally distracting. And I think they just look really, 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 really silly. Steve, do you still have the 7-string? So Steve and I, and nobody ever said anything, and I always thought it was cool, but we had matching blue flame Ibanez's, Nobody's ever said anything. I think it was cool. But, it's just a thing. All right. We're about there, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful, 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 wonderful evening. Before we get out of here, I do want to say that, I've been talking about kind of some of the changes that are going to be coming for the show. I should say improvements. And that actually means that, when you sit here, instead of me just kind of going, let me just answer some questions, which I love doing, so don't get me wrong. Nothing, still got it, awesome, need some work. That's Mr. Serena on the 7470, I think is the model of that. And it may be a 7420. Maybe a 7420, the blue flame on there, because I think the 7470 is the model after that. So the idea is actually that there are going to be themes and or multiple topic threads, such that when you guys hang out here, we're going to cover some stuff that, first of all, is insightful, hopefully, to the journey of where you're at. Tom Atkins, my pleasure. Thank you for the data download, Doug. You rock. You rock. But thank you. And the idea is that I want to put a bunch of meat on the proverbial bone, such that when people go, where's the beef? And, hopefully they go, well, it's at Doppler's Gear Garage, but I got my own filet mignon going on. Okay, hang on. We got a couple little questions coming in here. We got Slide Winder Ring. What's going on? Okay, what width nut do I prefer on my guitars? That is a great question. You want to know want to know the tragic answer to that is I don't know. In fact, I can't tell you kind of like, oh, this one's got this, blah, 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 this one's got that. I can tell you back in the day, to totally date myself, I liked a number 2 Floyd Rose nut. That I could tell you. Totally date myself there. But here's the deal. The shape of the neck. So this broadcaster reissue has a U-shaped neck. There are necks that I refer to that have, as opposed to a U, they have a D. And they have kind of a little bit of a ridge right here. I do not do well with those necks, because what those prevent me from doing is wrapping my thumb. That is to say, in this area where the U-ishness kind of comes in like that, the D-shaped neck kind of comes around like that. That is to say, it protrudes out a little bit more, and I can't get my thumb around the top of the neck for the Hendrix chords. I I won't go so far as to say I hate those shaped necks, but I have a particularly hard time. So none of my guitars have that quote unquote D-shaped neck. A U-shaped neck I love because I can do all the Hendrix things. I love the way it feels. You can get down if you need to do the legato thing. You can do the bends, double stops. You can do the Hendrixy kind of Stevie Ray stuff like that. I'm more interested in the neck shape, and as long as it's not too narrow up here, because if you look at, you're not going to really be able to see it. You're not. All right. Well, you can see the kind of the callous, bulbous growth on the ends of my fingertips there. Like, let's see if I can use my head as a. There you go. Like there's like that. There it is. Like that. That's kind of ugly, but the reality is those suckers really stick out. What it means is that when I'm down at the bottom of the neck, when the string spacing is too small, as I start muting strings that I don't want to mute, I start getting unwanted pull-offs that I don't want to get. I get unwanted hammer-ons that I don't want to get as well. So I don't like it too narrow, but sometimes the size of the width of the neck can offset that. But if it's a very thin neck, and it's not super wide, that string spacing begins to become a problem. There we go. What's going on, my man? How are you doing? Good to see you. Do I have a slide winder handy? I've got several in the house here. They're over there. I think I can see one right now. So he's created these great magnetic slides that actually kind of make a magnetic connection with the string. Very, 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 very cool. That's right. I guess Thomas did when he mounted it. Right, he mounts it backwards like that. But I'm still seeing that thing. Hold on. Nah, there's got to be something smarter than that. Maybe he's got a different clip than these do. But that's certainly better. But I'm still seeing... Oh, well. All right. And yes, those necks are like baseball bats. But I actually don't mind a baseball bat neck. Slide winders. Great to see you, my friend. Okay. Yeah, 7420. There we go. Thanks, Steve. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, do me a favor. Look for hopefully that Celestin video tomorrow. I will put a post up about it. I want to thank you for hanging out. As I mentioned, we're going to be working on deeper, more meaningful live streams that hopefully the quality of the instruments, there we go. He removed the clamp and mounted it on a pivot behind the headstock. There we go. The idea is deeper live streams where we're really focusing still on answering questions, but the idea is, I think, as we work on these other threads, there we go. Breton, Thomas screwed or Velcroed it on. I love it. Thank you very much, sir. But we're going to kind of take deeper dives on these range of things. And the great thing is because, I'm kind of deep diving on a bunch of different things. I'm just kind of discovering this. Like, I think this is a great talking topic. And then, make sure that people can have their feedback. And yes, those are super cool. Just don't go through the security of the airport with one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific. I thank you so much for hanging out. Have a great evening, and stay safe and have fun. Cheers.